The moment she grabbed the leather sleeve of my jacket, the world seemed to slow down, because fear has a weight to it, and I felt all of hers pour into that single touch, a small hand trembling against a scarred biker's arm as engines roared in the background and neon lights flickered like they didn't care about human pain, and before I could even look down properly, she tilted her face up at me with eyes too old for her age and silently begged me to be something I was not, something she desperately needed in that instant. And that was the moment my life split into a before and an after, because sometimes destiny doesn't knock politely, it clings to you in a crowded parking lot and refuses to let go. Before the story pulls you deeper, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and small moments that can change lives forever, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this connect hearts across the world. My name is Daniel Cross, and for most people I was just another biker with a heavy build, a weathered face, and a past that sat on my shoulders like a permanent shadow, riding a black Harley that growled louder than my thoughts, wearing patches that told a story I rarely explained, a story of mistakes, lost years, and roads taken for the wrong reasons, and that night I had stopped at a roadside diner off the highway, the kind of place where truckers, bikers, and lonely souls crossed paths without asking questions, where the smell of fried food mixed with gasoline and rain-soaked asphalt, and I remember thinking only about coffee and silence when I noticed her standing near the entrance, a little girl named Emily Carter, though I wouldn't learn her name until much later, wearing a thin hoodie that looked too big for her, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, eyes darting around like she was tracking danger in every direction, and behind her, not far away, a man arguing loudly with a woman, his movements sharp and unpredictable, the kind that made instinct kick in even before logic could catch up. I tried to ignore it at first, because people like me learn to mind their own business, but she didn't give me that choice, because she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper, asking me to pretend, just for a moment, that I was her dad, and I knew right away that this wasn't a game, this was survival. I played along because sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting, it's standing still and letting someone borrow your strength, so I wrapped an arm around her shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world, feeling how tense she was, how her small body shook as if it was holding back a storm, and I could feel eyes on us, the arguing man suddenly stopping, his gaze narrowing as he looked at the biker who now stood between him and the girl, and there was a long, heavy pause where everything balanced on a knife's edge, where one wrong move could turn ugly, but then something shifted, because people like him recognize when they've lost control of a situation, and after a few muttered words, he backed off, dragging the woman away, disappearing into the blur of headlights and rain. Emily didn't relax right away, because fear doesn't leave just because danger does, but eventually her grip loosened, though she didn't step away, and that was when I realized this wasn't just about that moment, because she had nowhere else to go. What followed was not some dramatic rescue scene from a movie, but something quieter and heavier, because I learned that Emily had been drifting between unstable homes, relatives who didn't want the responsibility, a mother trapped in a cycle she couldn't break, and men who came and went like storms, and that night she had been left alone while adults fought their own battles, forgotten in the chaos, and she had done the only thing she could think of, which was find the biggest, toughest looking person around and hope he could scare the danger away, and the irony of it hit me hard, because all my life people had crossed the street to avoid me, yet here was a child trusting me with her safety. I stayed with her until authorities arrived, because leaving felt impossible, and as we sat on the cold bench outside the diner, I gave her my jacket because she was shivering, and she leaned against me like it was the safest place she had known in a long time, and something inside me cracked open, something I thought had been sealed shut years ago after losing my own family to choices I regretted too late. The days that followed were messy and complicated, filled with phone calls, paperwork, and questions I never expected to answer, because I didn't plan on staying involved, yet every time I thought about walking away, I remembered how she looked at me when she asked me to pretend, not asking for love or promises, just protection, and I realized how thin the line was between pretending and becoming, because the more time I spent checking in on her situation, the more invested I became, visiting her at a temporary shelter, bringing small things like books and snacks, watching her slowly smile more, laugh a little louder, and trust a little deeper, and people around me were surprised, bikers I rode with, friends who knew my past, because they saw a different side of me, one that didn't fit the stereotype, but life doesn't care about labels, it cares about actions, and mine were changing me as much as they were helping her. There were challenges that tested every ounce of patience I had, moments when the system moved too slowly, when Emily's future felt uncertain, when I questioned whether someone like me had any right to be involved at all, because I carried my own guilt, my own failures, and the fear that I would disappoint her the way adults always had, and there were nights I sat alone on my bike, engine off, staring at nothing, wondering if pretending had been easier than committing, but then she would draw me pictures of us riding together, stick figures with helmets and smiles, or she would tell social workers that her dad was a biker who protected her, and every time I corrected her gently, saying I wasn't really her dad, she would just nod like she understood, but her eyes said something else, something hopeful and stubborn, and slowly, without any dramatic announcement, pretending stopped being an act and started becoming a role I was growing into. Months passed, seasons changed, and while the world kept spinning, something steady formed between us, built on consistency, showing up, and small promises kept, and in that time I learned that being a father figure wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, about showing a child that they mattered enough for someone to stay, and Emily grew stronger, more confident, her shoulders no longer hunched in fear, her laughter filling rooms that once felt empty, and the day came when I was asked if I wanted to make it official, to take on legal responsibility, and the weight of that question was heavier than any bike I had ever lifted, because it meant no more pretending, no escape routes, just commitment, and I said yes not because I was fearless, but because fear had already taken too much from both of us. Near the end of this story, before it settles into your heart, take a moment to think about how many people around you are silently wishing for someone to stand up for them, and if this journey has touched you in any way, please like the video, share it, and leave a comment, because your engagement helps stories of hope reach those who need them most. Emily still sometimes jokes about how she picked the scariest dad on the highway, and I still ride my bike, but now every mile feels different, because I'm riding towards something instead of away from it, and when I look back at that night in the parking lot, I realize that pretending to be her dad didn't just save her from fear in that moment, it saved me from a lifetime of regret, and just before this story ends, I want you to comment one word that describes how this story made you feel. Because every shared emotion builds a bridge between strangers, and sometimes that bridge is exactly what someone needs to keep going, and if this story touched your heart even a little, stay kind, stay aware, and remember that sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to pretend you are stronger than you think, until one day you realize you truly are.